On the phone, our panel for today, David Sirota, best-selling author of Hostile Takeover, How Big Money and Corruption Conquered Our Government and How We Take It Back. You can check him out at davidsirota.com. And Victoria Jones, managing editor and White House correspondent for Talk Radio News Service at talkradionews.com. We may be joined a little bit later by Steve Clemens from the Washington Note. In the meantime, welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let's start, obviously, with the supplemental funding. Victoria, why don't you just give us a little bit of a breakdown? What happened this week? The supplemental bill, I guess the second attempt to send a bill to George Bush to continue to fund the war was made, and this one passed. It did not include timelines, though, did it?
It did not include timelines. I mean, you just basically laid it out better than I could. You laid it out. What is being said about this, and it's interesting and maybe a little unfair, is the banner headlines everywhere is Democrats caved. That's the storyline that's being fed by the media, by Republicans, and by some Democrats also, and by Democrats in the media, interestingly. And we had a split among Republicans on this, not so much of a split, though, but quite a big split among Democrats on this as they tried to decide whether they were going to continue to be holdouts and wanting a timeline, or whether they were going to fund the troops now and just hold out for another 4 months and get stuck into this and get back on track with it again.
Now, David Sirota, the vote in the Senate, 70% of the Democrats voted for it in the Senate. The numbers were almost reversed in the House. The majority of Democrats voted against it. But that doesn't tell the whole story, and you're one of those people, David, who believes that the Democrats caved. First, tell us the whole story about the way this vote was set up and why you think the Democrats caved, if that, in fact, is what you believe.
Yeah, it is. The key thing to look at was what happened in the House. Every bill that comes to the floor in the House comes with a bill that's known as a rule. The rule sets the terms of debate for the underlying bill at hand. The rules are where the real power of Congress is, and unfortunately what happened, the reason the numbers were reversed in the House on the final vote was because they jerry-rigged a vote on the rule to basically help Republicans pass the bill. And here's what I'm talking about. The rule basically didn't have an underlying bill. The only thing the rule allowed in order was a vote, an up or down vote, on the Republican plan to fund the war without timelines. And so the rule comes, obviously, from the Democratic leadership. So essentially what we had was the Democratic leadership passed a rule that basically allowed most of their members to look like they were voting against the war, when in fact most of them, all of them, except for 7, voted for the rule that set up the situation for this blank check to pass. So it was a very, very, very devious way of doing things in the House. So you've basically got, Democratic members going to the floor saying, I'm voting against the Republican bill, I'm voting against the blank check, yet, again, almost all of them voted for the rule, which both the AP and the Washington Post noted, was the key thing in setting up the real passage of the blank check.
All right, so Victoria, tell me from your perspective, why you think it's unfair to say that the Democrats caved in this regard. I mean, they sent a bill that had timelines from the House and the Senate, and Bush vetoed it. So tell me from your perspective why you don't see this as a capitulation.
Well, I'm not saying it's necessarily from my perspective, but I think that from the perspective of some Democrats, it is the case. I think that some people could say, look, Democrats always said that they would fund the troops. They always said that that was something that they would do. And it was clear that they didn't have the votes to be able to sustain this. And if they were going to just continue like this, they were just at some point going to be accused of not funding the troops. And if they're accused of not funding the troops, once that word starts to get out, then they've lost politically. And any support that they have politically in the country, which at the moment is huge in terms of not supporting the war, is going to start to trickle away.
Or at the very least, it could. Well, here's Carl Levin making essentially that argument today on Face the Nation. This is number 4.
But Senator Levin, the Congress went ahead last week and gave the president the money to go ahead and continue fighting the war, at least through September. Is that an indication in your mind that Congress simply does not have the power to stop this war?
Well, what it is an indication of is we're going to support the troops. There's no difference between Democrats and Republicans on that point. When those troops are there and they're in harm's way, we are not going to either cut funding or prohibit funding for our troops. We're together on that. The big divide between Democrats and Republicans, which was shown in that vote for a bill which the president vetoed, is that Democrats are determined to tell the Iraqi leaders that their dawdling has got to end, the open-ended commitment's over, and that we are going to begin to reduce our presence in 120 days as a way of forcing them to take responsibility for their own country. That's where the difference is. But as long as those troops are in harm's way, most Democrats, 70% of us in the Senate, are going to vote to provide them funding.
All right, so David Sirota, what's wrong with that strategy? This notion of like, look, we attempted we attempted to do this one way, we can't do it now, and now we're going to wait for September.
Well, there's a couple things wrong with it. The first thing is as what I call the innocent bystander myth, this myth that every single Democratic lawmaker wants us to believe that they're the innocent bystanders, they have no power whatsoever to do anything. And so they're just trying to do what they can to help the troops, but we should feel all sorry for them that they have no power to stop the war, when in fact a quick reading of the United States Constitution shows that the Founding Fathers put the power of the purse in the Congress in order to be a co-equal branch of government. These people could set a time when funding will run out so that the President of the United States would be forced to end the war. The idea that somehow providing blank check after blank check after blank check actually helps troops is ridiculous. And I should say the idea that setting a time in the future when funds would be cut off somehow hurts the troops and would leave them basically naked and unarmed in the middle of Baghdad is positively absurd. It is absolutely absurd. It has no historical relevance. It has no basis in fact. The way the Congress is supposed to act if it wants to end the war is to use its power of the purse to force the President of the United States as a co-equal branch to change course, change the plan, and redeploy.